Hi, I'm Dr. Betsy Greenleaf here with another episode of Body, Mind, Spirit. I'm very excited today. We're going to be talking about children's health with Dr. Sheila Kilbane. Thank you so much, Sheila, for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited to be here.
You know what? I was reading a little about your history, and you said you knew from the time you were 7 that you wanted to be a doctor. Did you always know you wanted to be a pediatrician?
I didn't. I always thought I wanted to do surgery. I wanted to cut people open. I was used to tell my mother I wanted to be a brain surgeon, but I just loved anything. I was a big tomboy, and I was cutting fish open and frogs open, and it just, anybody in my family who got a sliver or something, they would come to me, and I would, get a little needle or whatever, and take it out. So it was. I always later on, now I realize how lucky I was to know so early on exactly what I wanted to do. So it was, that was a good thing. And then when I was a kid, I used to get these high fevers, and my mother would, I was the youngest of five, so she wasn't jumping to take anybody to the doctor's office. And it would be after a few days, I'd have this high fever, and she would then take me in, and I would inevitably get a shot of penicillin. And my doctor was this big, bald gentleman, and he had a thick accent, and I was really scared of him. And if you've ever had a shot of penicillin, it's like cement going into your thigh. And it was, I would get better, but he didn't take any action to figure out what was driving the illness. And so my mother on her own ended up taking me to the Cleveland Clinic, and I had some studies done, and turns out I had a kidney infection most of this time, which can be really serious, as you know. And so I took antibiotics for 6 months, and then I was fine. And it's one of so many things came out of that, I think, for me. And one was really understanding that we have to get to the root of things. And sometimes it's medication, and is what we need. And it's also my mother knowing in her gut that something needed to be done, and she followed that intuition. And then for me, it was because I never felt like he never talked to me directly. That was when I did sort of say, I think I do want to be a pediatrician, and I'm going to talk to the kids directly, and I'm going to give them options whenever possible. So
I love that because that's one of the things I like about our pediatrician is that they completely ignore me when I'm in the room and they talk to the kids, and the kids are not used to that. They're always looking at me like, how should I answer? I'm like, go ahead, talk, you let them know how you're feeling. So,
yes, yeah.
that's one of the things I'm so excited to have you here is because, even though I'm a doctor, when it comes to my kids, all my medical knowledge goes out the window, and I like that mom brain takes over, and you just kind of get panicky, like I want to protect my little offspring. And I'm sure you deal with that every day. So just for parents in general, do you have any advice of like how to even approach going to the pediatrician to begin with?
Yes, and that's such. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's a completely different world when it comes to kids. And we even if we see, like, I do see a lot of medical people, a lot of the parents of my patients are in medicine, and so I always say, you get to be mom or dad. You don't, I'm going to talk you through the same way I do everything else. And it's so when you are at the pediatrician's office, for parents, I do encourage that. Is just coming with you know with your questions, being prepared. That's always super helpful. And then depending upon the age of your kids, having a little chat with your kids ahead of time, so you get, what are their symptoms, because you can help the pediatricians come to the conclusion a little bit more quickly if we know what we want to talk about, and we know really what's happening. As you know, in medicine, it's people, we kind of talk around maybe what we need. And if we can get to the heart of things, sometimes that can facilitate the communication. And the other thing when it comes to, I think, nutrition, because I think a lot of adults, especially in the medical field, have started to shift their own diets and do these things for themselves, but they haven't figured out how to do it with the kids. And that's where I love to really help people. And that's why I wrote my book, because I wanted people to have a tool to help to make these nutrition changes with the children.
I know, I think that's so important, and we'll just jump right into your book. So your book is called Healthy Children, Happy Moms, which, you know what, I have to say, if my kids are healthy, I am happy, because otherwise there's so much worry. But I mean, if you think about, when I talk about this in so many different formats, but your gut being basically the source of all inflammation and pretty much leading to so many disease states. And we don't, like, I'm seeing adults in my practice, and I can't undo the things that they did, as children. And if we just get them early and get them on the right track.
It's so exciting to have these tools and to be able to start it young. And I kind of stumbled upon it, potentially similar to the way you did, is when I started right out of residency and I was seeing these kids, I was doing antibiotics and steroids and antacids. And it was when I was prescribing antacids to 2-month-old babies that I kind of was like, what's wrong with this picture? And so I just started to read a lot more and ask questions and listening, in moms, like, say, for a child with eczema and recurrent ear infections. And I had one particular case that I will always remember. And I'd been seeing him since he was born, and he did have recurrent ear infections and eczema, and mom was breastfeeding. And around the 7th or 8th month visit, she said, Sheila, I took dairy out of my diet and his eczema is improving. And
Wow.
and we had actually already referred him to get ear tubes at that point in time because he'd had so many ear infections. And there was a snafu with insurance, and that the surgery got canceled. And, fast forward to the 1-year well visit. And the day before the well visit, mom had a big omelet, so a lot of eggs, and he had a big eczema flare. So she was already off of dairy and had this flare up with eggs. And so we said, okay, let's keep dairy and eggs out of mom's diet and out of Johnny's diet, and let's see what happens. And she came back 3 or 4 weeks later, and his eczema was completely clear. And he'd had fluid in his ear still, and that had resolved. So and she hadn't rescheduled the ear tube surgery. So I followed them for a little bit, and we were able to forego the ear tube surgery, and the eczema resolved. And, eventually he was able to put the dairy and eggs back into his diet. But at that moment in time, that was what was triggering his inflammation. So it's very exciting, because also when the kids come out of that crisis mode, moms are able to sleep better, and you don't have to be up on Dr. Google all night long. And it's just so by being methodical about how we're approaching things and looking at, we were changing one thing at a time and following him. And that was how I kind of stumbled on, wow, nutrition is playing a big role. I need to know about this. I need to understand what's happening here.
Are there certain foods that you see tend to be the worst amongst your pediatric patients?
Yeah, so I talk a lot about dairy and gluten, but before we go there, because that can be really overwhelming to many people, before we even think about dairy and gluten, we talk about just a lot of the sugar, the artificial dyes and colors, a lot of the packaged foods, and the processed meats and the processed fats. So those are things, the sugary drinks, that can be sodas, a lot of the sport drinks. It can even be juice. Just regular old fruit juice has as much sugar in a cup of just straight orange juice as there is in a cup of soda.
Wow.
And right, so and we think that we're doing a healthy service with that, But what we know is that sugar suppresses the immune system. So that can be one of the number one things we do. If I'm seeing a child for the first time who has recurrent illnesses and they're on antibiotics, every few months, the first thing we do is just start to decrease those sugary drinks, and we just replace them with water. And then we go and you start to look at the packages in your pantry and in your refrigerator, and we start to get rid of those artificial dyes and colors. So I would always start there, and that's where we were just talking about on my website, we have the option, we have a mini cleanse, and I can give you that link that families can just start making those really simple changes that can make a big difference quickly.
I always wonder, like when I'm in the supermarket and I'm going down the cereal aisle, like I think like, how can this still be sold? I mean, that talk about sugar and artificial colors and like, these rainbow of colors. And these things are like targeted as kids cereals, and that this is what kids should be eating for breakfast. And I'm surprised that they're still, on the market, and that people still think this is a normal thing that we should be doing for a breakfast.
Yes, it's not really food, and it's just how you said, it's marketed to kids, and it harms, we have this nice, the layer of our GI tract, we have this really thin layer of cells in our GI tract, and if we're eating those artificial dyes and colors and a lot of sugar, it harms that, which ultimately impacts our immune system. And it's really, sometimes you'll feel like you're you're up a creek without a paddle, but little by little, if you start to make those changes, that's where you start to see the magic happen. And I always even talk about having dinner for breakfast. I'd rather kids have a, a burger and maybe a little bit of a smoothie or a piece of fruit for breakfast than a bowl of cereal or a bagel and cream cheese, because that will be a big load of sugar versus having some fat and protein.
That is great. I can't wait to find out more when we come back from the commercial break. 80% of women will develop a pelvic health condition at some point in their lives. There is relief. There is hope. The Pelvic Floor Store, your resource for personal health. And we're back with Dr. Sheila Kilbane. We were talking about foods and inflammation, especially in children, leading to disease. I was thinking about it because when I think back on the processed food market, I'm thinking a lot of those foods, I may be getting the dates off, but like maybe around the 50s, 60s, started seeing more processed foods. And I was wondering like what the impact on like rates of childhood diseases we've seen, in modern times because of all these processed foods.
Yes, the rates of chronic illness. So kids, it used to be about 15% of kids had a chronic illness, and now it's closer to 50%.
Wow.
1 in every 2 kids. And it's in anybody who's been into school now. If you think about when I was a kid, I went to a small elementary school, and I remember one child in the whole, one of my little friends got type 1 diabetes, but she was the only kid I remember in the whole school with an illness. There weren't EpiPens and peanut allergies and peanut classrooms. And it's completely changed now. And the rates of food allergies, autism, asthma, ADHD have significantly risen. Eczema in some parts of the country is up to 30% now. And so it's, we could talk for, hours about what's happening there, but one of the biggest things we have changed is our food. And we're living these lives where we're eating much more of our food out of a package versus something that's grown in maybe a backyard garden or that you're getting in a farmer's market. And we're spraying our food with a lot more pesticides and herbicides. And we're living a lot further away from the land, and we have a lot of hand sanitizers. There's something called the hygiene hypothesis. And what that proposes is that we're almost too clean, in that we're not playing out in the dirt. And even gardening, you know, you pull a weed and you get a shower of bacteria that we are ingesting, and that helps to keep the good bacteria in our GI tract. So it's we yes, we want to be clean. You know, we want to wash our hands with soap and water, and sanitization, you know, from the, you know, or 100 years ago, is part of why we are so healthy now. But we've swung the pendulum a little bit too much, and we're not getting exposed to things that actually prime our immune system. So when our immune system sees something from a soil, whether it's a parasite or a bacteria, that actually helps to start the maturation of our immune system, and that's needed. And so there's, you know, there's some research saying that that might be part of why we're seeing such an increase in these illnesses.
You know, I feel so guilty because I didn't realize this until a few years back. I mean, my kids are now turning 11 and 13. And I remember when they were toddlers, I was one of those parents running after them with the hand sanitizer, like, you know, clean them every 2 seconds, when really kids need to be playing in the dirt. So,
Yeah, well, and it's a difference between playing in the dirt versus being at a daycare. You know, if you're in a daycare and you're being exposed to all the other kids, that's where I am a bigger proponent of, you know, washing hands. And ideally, we're using soap and water and hand sanitizers only when needed, because they're killing a lot, because we do have bacteria on our skin, and we don't want to completely wipe out all of that bacteria, because that impacts the health of our skin. So it's, you were doing the right thing. You were doing what you knew at the time. And that's the other thing I always talk about, is we are always doing the best we can given the circumstances. And so now, you know, research is shifting. So now we just shift a little bit about, you know, in what we do with kids.
you know, I wanted to go back to the inflammatory foods because, you know, I find is so confusing is the dairy thing. Because I remember growing up and being told by my pediatrician, you know, at the time, you know, drink milk, you need it for your bones, you need to grow. And, you know, I'm still getting that message from our traditional pediatricians that the kids need to be drinking 3 cups of milk a day. But at the same time, I know it's inflammatory. So what is a parent to do, and what are other good sources of calcium, and do we need to be supplementing with calcium?
Yeah, so I have an entire chapter in my book on dairy, because this is such a hot button topic for parents, for grandparents, for pediatricians. Sometimes grandparents are like, oh no, how can you not be giving them dairy? So the thing that we confuse, I think, is we think dairy equals healthy bones. So what I do is I break it down and I say, okay, dairy, we get calcium, we get fat, we get vitamin D, but vitamin D that's fortified, so it's not even natural in milk. You know, we get vitamin D through sunlight and through cold water fish. So what I do is I say, okay, what do we need for healthy bones? Does it have to be dairy? Does dairy have to be our source of calcium? And when you really look through the literature, the reason that we say that we need dairy for healthy bones is because the dairy advertisers have been very effective at selling dairy as something that makes healthy bones. And so when you break it down, though, we need 4 things for healthy bones. We need physical activity, and that is number 1. No matter what age you are, we want to have good physical activity, running around, jumping, playing, climbing on monkey bars. And the second thing we do is we do need adequate calcium. We also need adequate magnesium. We need all of the other minerals that are required for healthy bones. And then we also need green leafy vegetables. We need vitamin K2. And that's through green leafy vegetables, which, sometimes are lacking in children's diets. So we've got to be cognizant of that. And then the fourth thing we need is adequate levels of vitamin D. And which, again, we can get that through sunlight, we can get that through cold water fish, and we can get it through good high quality supplements, especially in most places in the winter time. You're unless you're around, a ring around the equator, you are going to need to take a vitamin D supplement in the winter time. And I can't stress enough that whether you look at Harvard or the Osteoporosis Foundation, the number one thing is physical activity with the ability to lay down bone. And there are many, many ways to get calcium. And it's Bok Choy is one of my favorite ways. And that people may say, what is that? But it's the vegetable it's in a lot of Asian cooking. And it's readily absorbable calcium. We also get calcium through oranges, through almonds. There's a whole list in my book of foods high in calcium. So it's, if you are somebody who tolerates dairy, you can do small amounts of milk, but so many people are sensitive to dairy but just don't realize it. And the studies with constipation and dairy, one study showed that 65% of kids with constipation improved when dairy was removed, and they improved within 1 week. So it's quite remarkable the amount of laxatives that we prescribe in pediatrics, when could we just be making a few nutrition changes and support their systems that way?
But that brings up too, because you were talking about how calcium's in almonds. What about some of these substitute milks, like the nut milks and rice milk and oat milk and whatever's on the supermarket this week?
It's so some of those plant-based or nut-based milks will have some of them are even fortified with calcium. So they may have some more calcium, especially almond. So that's okay. And if you need to bolster the calcium, the amount of calcium your child is getting, then that's okay. But it goes back to, I don't think kids need 16 to 24 ounces of any of those milks a day. I keep it between 8 to 10 ounces if they like it and that's what they want to drink. But otherwise, we should be doing water. And it's like cashew milk is another example. That's got some calcium in it. And if you need it for cooking, or even, if you do have a bowl of cereal, you could use one of these other milks that could bolster the calcium that your kids are getting.
It's interesting how you say that activity is really the key. And I think back to when I was a child, and they used to just like open the back door and you just go for hours. Yeah. And the only reason you knew to come home is in the town I grew up there, the local fire department had a 5 o'clock whistle. And when the 5 o'clock whistle went, all the kids knew to go back home. Now I find it almost next to impossible to get my kids to go outside, because we have cut off their tablets, the Nintendo, everything, but they're so like, I don't know what it is. And their friends are even worse. Like they're all just attached to these screens.
We've become so much more sedentary. And right now in a pandemic, it's more difficult, but that's where I think getting them in soccer, getting them in baseball and basketball, whatever, if you have to even do a little forcing maybe of getting them involved in some of these sports, and even those mini tramps, because you always have to be careful with trampolines because those can be a little bit dangerous, but even though they're so much fun. But even those little mini trampolines, I love those as an option, because most of the time kids will love to do that, and you can get ones that have a handle on it. And that's great. That bouncing is so good for your bone health and for your joints, because it's going to get your heart rate up. So anything that you can do to make it fun. And even, if parents, if you're going out for walks, going on bike rides, and getting out with animals, sometimes even getting a dog so that the kids have to go walk the dog is another option.
I like that idea. Don't tell my husband that one because that's the one my kids have been trying to be like, can we get another dog? So my dog is too big for them to walk. He's 165 pounds.
Oh
So
my gosh. What
yeah,
kind of dog is he?
he's a bull mastiff. Yeah, he walks them.
He would, they could saddle him up.
Exactly, exactly. So what other just quickly, like I know you can't tell us your what everything that's in your book, but what other points that you make in your book?
Yeah, so I really am very pragmatic in the book, and I go through and I talk about what are the triggers of inflammation. And so just there are five simple things. It's food, environmental allergies, environmental toxins, infectious diseases, and stress. And they can all weigh in equally. And it's always a matter of, I talk about it as like a cup of inflammation. So we need inflammation to some extent. If we cut a finger, we need inflammation to stop the bleeding, or if we sprain our ankle, we need inflammation. We need white cells to go to that area to heal the tissue. But what's happening is if we're eating a lot of junk food and not paying attention to those things, is that we've just got a lot of inflammation. And so if we just start to really slowly look at each of those categories, can we bolster, can we add a few more tools to manage stress, because we're always going to have stress, but can we maybe have a weekly family meeting to decrease stress a little bit with the kids, and just going through that pragmatically so that we're looking at each category. And that's where you can really start to see the nice magic happen, when we pay attention to that big picture.
We make all these changes now, we're going to have healthier adults in the future too. So, that's so important.
Yes, and Betsy, that's what I always talk about, that is that I think about these kids when they're 25, 26, and when they're ready to have babies and they want to get married, is I want to help them so that their bodies work the way that we want them to. They can have babies, they can, they have the energy, and that they don't have autoimmune conditions. And we're setting the foundation for them as adults.
This is wonderful. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, it's my website is sheilakilbane.com, and it's SHEILAKILBANE. And we'll have all the information about the book, sheilakilbane.com/book. And it will be out September 7th of 2021. But it will be a pre-sale here coming soon, this spring. So it should be up pretty quickly. We'll have a link, and it will be on Amazon, and you can get it at all the, you'll be able to get it from the website.
That is great. I'm actually looking forward to it. I can't wait to see it. So once again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time for being with us today.
Absolutely. It's been great. Thank you.
And I just want to remind our listeners and viewers that if you enjoyed this programming and any of the other programming on WYTV7.org, please check out their website. Also, if you feel free to donate so that we can continue to bring great programs to you, and also check out some of the other projects that they're using those donations for, because they're always involved in something great. Also, to find out more about me, go to drbetsygreenleaf.com, and we'll see you again next week on Body, Mind, Spirit. Thank you again, Sheila, for being with us.
Absolutely. My pleasure.